Hello and welcome to this session on including LGBTTQI learners in our lessons. I decided on this topic because it's related to the overarching theme of the MEXTESOL conference this year, Inclusive Teaching, Expanding Possibilities for English Language Learning. And I thought that a talk on including different types of learners into our lessons would be very pertinent. So let's begin, including LGBTTQI learners in our lessons. This talk is divided into two parts. Firstly, why we should include this type of learner into our lessons, and secondly, how. So before we begin looking at why we should include LGBTTQI learners in our lessons, I thought it would be a good idea to look at what the term LGBTTQI means. So the words lesbian, gay and bisexual I think are pretty clear to most people. What normally causes confusion in the term LGBTTQI are the T's. So let's begin looking at the first T, transsexual. A transsexual is a person whose biology doesn't match their gender identity. So in other words, they may have the biology of a woman, but their gender identity may be that of a man. And a transsexual has the possibility of effecting a change to remedy this by taking hormones, by undergoing an operation, and normally they do affect this change, okay, in order to match their biology with their gender identity. The second T stands for transvestite. This is a person who outwardly performs a gender identity which is different from their own. So their gender identity, their biology or their gender identity, could be that of a man, so they could have the gender identity of a man and they don't want to change that. But outwardly, but through the way they dress, through the way they cut their hair, they project an image of a gender identity that is different from their own. But they don't want to change their gender identity. They're happy with their gender identity. The only thing that they do is they outwardly perform, they look as if they have a different gender identity from their own. The third T stands for transgender. A transgender person is just like the transsexual. It's a person whose biology doesn't match their gender identity, but they don't want to make any change to remedy this. They don't make any change to remedy this. So they may have the biology of a man and their gender identity may be that of a woman, but this mismatch doesn't cause them conflicts. It doesn't. They don't have any problem with that, and they don't make any change to remedy it or change it. The Q in LGBTTQI stands for queer. This is a person who doesn't identify with the heteronormal model, and we'll be looking a little bit later on in the talk at what the heteronormal model is. A queer person is not necessarily gay or lesbian or even bisexual. They may be heterosexual, but they simply don't identify with the heteronormal model. An intersexual person is a person born with a sexual anatomy, so genitals, that don't fit into the traditional male-female dichotomy. They may be born, an intersexual person may be born with both sets of genitals, for example. A pansexual person, the P in pansexual is not included in the acronym LGBTTQI, but it is important to mention the term pansexual. This is a person who's attracted to all genders. They're attracted to men, they're attracted to women, they're attracted to transsexuals, transgender. Okay, so they have this attraction to all possible genders that exist. There are other terms that we should take a look at just to get them clear. The difference between gender and sexuality. So sexuality is how we live our sexual pleasure, our sexual attraction. It's how we live our sexual life. Gender is different. Gender is whether we are male or female, or on a spectrum of male or female, neither male, neither 100% female. So gender and sexuality are different things. They're often related. I mean, in the term LGBTTQI, we can see that some of the terms, such as transgender, relate to gender, and other terms such as lesbian relate to sexuality. Okay, but gender and sexuality are two different things. And then it's important to mention the difference between sexual orientation and sexual preference. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual, for example, are sexual orientations. So that attraction that a lesbian woman has, that affective and sexual attraction that she has for another woman, is her sexual orientation. Sexual preference is something different. Sexual preference could be, for example, a particular type of fetish that a person has. If they prefer somebody with, they're more attracted to somebody with short hair, for example, or a particular way of dressing, that they find a particular way of dressing attractive. That's sexual preference. So lesbian, gay, and bisexual are not sexual preferences under this definition, they are sexual orientations. And sexual orientation and sexual preference are often mixed up. So let's move on to why it's important to include these types of learners in our lessons. Well, to begin with, approximately 6 million people living in Mexico today are non-heterosexual. So they fall under the category of LGBTTQI. Just to give an example of what this means in education, there are 30.9 million students in education básica and media superior in Mexico. There are 480 institutions in these levels, and this gives us an average of 127 students per institution. Obviously, some institutions are much bigger, some institutions are smaller than this, no? But this gives us, using our percentage, our average that we saw on the previous slide of between 5 and 6% of people in Mexico being non-heterosexual, this gives us a figure of approximately 7 non-heterosexual students per institution in Mexico. Obviously, in bigger institutions, you're going to have more. In smaller institutions, you're going to have less. So should we include these students in our lessons? Should we include these students in our curriculum? I would argue yes, because the current educational philosophy is that we should not exclude anybody from our lessons, that we should try to include all of our students in our lessons. So even though these students are in the minority, I would argue that it's important to include them. So that's one reason why we should include these types of learners in our lessons. Another important reason is that I feel that it could reduce bullying, because by including these types of students in our lessons, all students could learn to accept difference in others and in themselves and become more tolerant. Just so that we can have an idea of how common bullying is, in Castellón, Spain in 2019, a report was published on a survey that was carried out, a study that was carried out with 87 students from the ages of 13 to 16, and around 80% of these students had witnessed anti-LGBTTQI bullying at school. So that's of the vast majority of students had witnessed this type of bullying against LGBTTQI students. And I would argue that in Mexico, it's probably not very different. If we look at the results of this survey carried out in 2013 by the COPRED, the Commission for the Prevention of Discrimination in Mexico City, over 80% of Mexico City citizens interviewed in this survey said that they discriminated against people whose sexual orientation was different from the heterosexual one. And 47.3%, almost half of people interviewed, said that they strongly discriminate. So as you can see, there's a lot of discrimination amongst the population of Mexico City against LGBTTQI people. And in school and in classrooms, this, I would argue, shouldn't be very different. So as teachers, we can help to combat this discrimination by including these types of learners in our lessons. Another very important reason for including these types of learners in our lessons, and really I think this is the center, this idea is the center of my presentation today, is that nobody is normal. Even heterosexual people don't conform to a norm. Everybody has something special about them. And including LGBTTQI learners in our lessons could allow all students to explore their own individual identities. And I think this is something that's very, very important, and we'll see this argument more as we move through the presentation today. So how do LGBTTQI learners feel in our classes? Normally these learners are in the closet. This is the term that is used for somebody who is not open about their identity with other people. They can't be themselves. And my argument or my question is that, do we really want students in our class not being themselves? Do we want students in our classes who don't feel comfortable in our classes, who feel excluded from our lessons? I would argue no, and it's our job as teachers to try to include them. What are the consequences of being in the closet? Well, there are a number of different negative consequences of a person living in the closet, of a person hiding their true identity from the world. Firstly, obviously, if you're hiding and if you're not being honest about who you are, this leads to some kind of lying or some form of lying to family, friends, workmates, and even to yourself about certain feelings and certain actions that you may have. There's also a feeling of guilt. When somebody lives in the closet, there's a strong feeling of guilt because you don't conform to the norm, you don't conform to how family and school and society is telling you how you should live, and this makes you feel guilty. It can lead to depression because obviously somebody who lives this way is not very happy. It's necessary to repress your emotions and your identity. In order to be in the closet, you need to repress your true self and how you feel, and ignore your feelings, ignore key aspects of your identity. And this leads to a difficulty with connecting with yourself and with other people. And of course, this leads to unsatisfactory relationships, because in your friendships, in your affective relationships, in your family relationships, you're not fully 100% being yourself. So this leads to an unsatisfactory, almost superficial relationship with other people. So there's a lot of negative consequences of living in the closet. And I believe it's our job as teachers to not potentialize the closet through what we cover in our lessons or how we plan our lessons. And why do these types of learners feel this way? Why do they feel all the negative consequences that we just talked about of being in the closet? Well, normally it's got to do with unquestioned heteronormativity in the classroom. We as teachers normally don't question heteronormativity. The other students in the classroom who are heterosexual don't question heteronormativity. And one of the key arguments in this presentation is that we should be questioning heteronormativity in our lessons in order to include LGBTQI learners and bring benefits for all of the learners in our classroom. So what is heteronormativity? It's a phrase coined in 1991. It basically is the attitude, the heteronormative attitude is the attitude that heterosexuality is the only normal and natural expression of sexuality. But it goes far beyond sexuality. Obviously, it begins with the idea that really sexuality, true sexuality, healthy sexuality is between a man and a woman. That's the basic idea. And this idea is then reinforced all around us in Disney movies, in TV series, in advertising, in what we get told at school is normal, normally what families tell their children is normal. So this heteronormative model is reinforced in all of the interactions that we have every day. A key idea in the heteronormative model, or a key goal, is getting married. Really, that is one of the main goals in life. It's not the only goal in life under the heteronormative model, but it is one of the main goals in life, is to find that special person to complete you and get married to them. So marriage is really the basis of the heteronormative model. And related to this, of course, is the idea of having a family. If a marriage doesn't have a family, if there are no children in the marriage, under the heteronormative model, this is not a fully complete marriage. You need children in order to create a family, and it's the family that forms the basis of society under the heteronormative model. And this puts an awful lot of pressure on many people to not only get married, but once you're married, to have children. This is the societal expectation that one should have children. And then often once we have these children begin acting out the heteronormative model, playing at getting married, playing at being boyfriend and girlfriend. This is often something seen as very, very positive by the parents and the rest of the family, and it's something that's encouraged, and this once again reinforces the heteronormative model. And so not only do children get bombarded with images from TV and from other media sources, but the heteronormative model is the best one, or is the only valid one, but also in the family this is often reinforced. And it spills over into the way that homosexual people act. And we can see here this lesbian couple, copying almost a heterosexual marriage. We can see gender roles being reinforced. So one of the women almost looks like a man, and the other woman is very, very feminine. So gender roles are reinforced, and we can see that this photo could actually be a traditional heterosexual marriage. There's very little difference between this image and a photograph of a heteronormal heterosexual marriage. And even when it's obvious what the gender of both people is, we can see, for example, in this photograph, two gay men copying the heteronormative model of marriage. This looks very, very much like a heterosexual marriage. And in fact, there is a term, homonormativity, coined in 2003. And homonormativity is the expectation among homosexual people for how one should behave. And one of the goals that's very, very powerful for homosexual people at the moment is to get married. Okay, it's a same-sex marriage. Another goal which is very, very strong at the moment is the idea that homosexuals should have children. So there's a big difference here, I think, between being able to get married as a homosexual couple, being able to have children, and actually having to do it. The idea here is that under homonormativity, The idea is that one should do this. And obviously this is coming from heteronormativity. So this is a very, very restrictive, very exclusive model for people to try to live under. And really, my argument is that human beings don't need to live this way. We don't need to copy these very, very traditional models. And even people such as Lady Gaga, who's a gay icon, even she sometimes falls into the trap of living out the heteronormative model. And we're going to watch a clip now. I'm going to show you a clip from a movie called A Star is Born, where Lady Gaga is proposed to and gets married. And the song that she sings in this clip is very, very interesting. It idealizes the heteronormative model that we should be in this constant search for this one person to complete us, and ultimately get married to that person. And there's a line towards the end of the clip, I hope you'll be able to hear it, which is, there's something real out there for me. So there's this search for something real. And that really, if the idea here, I think, is that if you don't get married, it's not real. Okay, it's not a real relationship. So take a look. Let's take a look at the clip.
Really?
You mind your
But it's a stupid thing I just
string
did.
beans and Brussels sprouts.
Is that what you were doing when you left the table?
I don't know.
What was
You told me
going on?
looking for some
Did you
pliers.
get-
I didn't know what we was gonna do. I think we was gonna do it.
Oh, she's another ring.
Well, that's just temporary. No, Jack. Wait a minute. Let's anoint this. Let's do it today. Yo, for real. No, you get it, Jess. I'll call my cousin right now. It's Saturday. Nobody's gonna be in there. Let's go.
I mean, the place has a magical quality to it.
What? It has a magical quality?
does.
What do you mean?
I mean, that church is special.
We can go. I'll take you to get a dress.
There you go, right there.
It'd be great. Okay, you're coming with us for sure.
I can't believe this. What am I doing? Okay, sure. I don't know what love is.
My brother. Good to see you.
Good to see you,
Jack.
man.
Thank you so much.
Welcome to the Lord's house.
With the power.
I think that's how it goes, something like that. Do you take it? Do you take him?
I do.
I do.
Listen to what you said. I'm glad you did.
One thing at a time. It's not. I know there's something real out there for me. I swear I've seen an angel.
So it seems that even Lady Gaga is not immune to heteronormative pressure. She doesn't even seem to be questioning the she's not questioning the heteronormative model by doing this movie. So this singer who sang a number of years ago, Born This Way, a song which celebrates diversity, seems to not even realize what she's doing by participating in this movie. I mean, she's super reinforcing the heteronormative model. And where does this come from? I mean, it's interesting that in certain cultures, such as the Chinese culture, which is based on Buddhism or which has a strong Buddhist religious tradition. Heteronormativity is not that strong. It seems to be much stronger in Judeo-Christian traditions. The idea of Adam and Eve, the Adam and Eve myth is the basis for the idea of how we should live today. That really the idea is that a man should be with a woman, and that the man should marry the woman, and that this is the basis. It's very strong, this idea that everything is based around a man and a woman finding each other, falling in love, getting married, having children, having the family as the basis of everything. So we've spoken about the damage that the heteronormative model does to LGBTTQI people and the LGBTTQI learners in our lessons. But what about the heterosexual learners in our lessons? Do we want, I'd like to consider now, reflect on, do we really want heterosexual young people, many of whom are students, to grow up believing heteronormal myths? Is that something that's going to be healthy for them? Let's just do a little bit of personal reflection for a few minutes. Take a look at these heteronormal myths and decide which of them you agree with and which of them you don't agree with. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, so you can probably think of other myths that I haven't put here, but I think these are the main ones that often we don't even question, and they come from the heteronormative model. These are messages that we receive from our families, from educators, from society, from movies, from TV. These myths are incredibly strong, and I think a key question is, what are the benefits of these myths? Just think for a couple of minutes what the benefits of these myths are. Here are the myths again. How do these myths help us to be happy? And how do they help us in our lives? Okay, were you able to think of any benefits? Probably not. I mean, I certainly can't think of any benefits of thinking this way. And often we don't even question this way of thinking. Millions and millions of people in Mexico are living in Mexico today and not questioning these ideas which come from heteronormativity. Now, well, I hope I've convinced you that as teachers, as educators, it would be valid to design our curricula, or at least include in curricular design the idea that the heteronormative myths are bad and that the heteronormative model should be questioned, or that we should question it with our students. But of course, I mean, you'll realize, of course, that practically, in practical terms, if we think of the stakeholders, I mean, we as teachers we are probably not the key stakeholders actually in curriculum design, because the government is involved, parents are involved, the institution that we work for, It's involved the learners themselves, especially if they're adult learners, are key stakeholders in curriculum design. And these stakeholders may not agree with our desire as teachers to question the heteronormative myth. And I agree, this is an unsolved problem. I'm not sure that I have an answer for this, for how to overcome the pure force of these stakeholders and their role in reinforcing the heteronormative model. But if I haven't convinced you that this is worth trying, let's just ask ourselves some questions. And in fact, you could ask your students these questions as well. You could ask your students, obviously rephrasing them depending on the age and the level of English that they have. But how is the heteronormative model working for Mexico? Is it really working well? Is it giving lots of benefits to the country? How does it help to combat machismo? Does it reinforce it, or does it question it and reduce it? Or do we feel that machismo is a good idea? Do we feel that it's a good model? And how is the heteronormative model related to the machista model? Should we be conservative and keep heteronormativity as the ideal? Because often this is what happens, isn't it? There's a lot of discourse about the importance of conserving the nuclear family as the center of everything. Man, woman, marriage, children. Is this something that we should fight to keep? Should we fight to conserve this model as the ideal for how society should be constructed, as the base for society? Should we be conservative? And another question, does heteronormativity reduce the incidence of feminicide? What is heteronormativity's role in feminicide? Does it contribute? Does it reduce it? How? Do you think that Mexican feminists agree with heteronormativity? I mean, these feminists who are protesting across Mexico at the moment, do you think they feel heteronormativity is a good idea? Why? Why not? Why are they protesting? Do they have valid demands? Do you think there's a reason behind their anger? Is heteronormativity working so well that feminists or women in general are happy with the situation in Mexico? And finally, does the heteronormative model help young people to manage healthy, effective relationships in Mexico? Does this model provide a model for how a healthy, effective relationship should be? I think these are very, very important questions, and these are actually questions that you could bring up with your students. The question is, would you get into trouble with the educational institution that you're working for discussing these topics? But I think these are super important questions for us to think about. And therefore, I also think that it's worth trying to convince these stakeholders, trying to convince parents, trying to convince the nation state, trying to convince learners and the institution of the importance of debunking heteronormative myths. But don't take my word for it. Let's look at the academic point of view. This quote comes from a book published by the Flaxo in Chile. The Flaxo is present in all Latin American countries, and it's a university which specializes in research, in sociological research and political research. Let's see how they feel about heteronormativity. So they put heteronormativity in the same basket with racism, oppression, economic oppression, xenophobia, colonialism. So really, it's not a positive term, heteronormativity. There are, it's sociologically, from an academic point of view, it's really not seen as something positive. It's not. There are no arguments out there arguing that the heteronormative model helps in any way. And this quote is extremely strong. Como manifestación extrema de la violencia contra las mujeres, el femicidio no solo funciona entonces como una herramienta del patriarcado, sino también como una herramienta del racismo, de la opresión económica, del adultocentrismo, de la xenofobia, de la heteronormatividad y hasta como el vestigio del colonialismo y sus prácticas de exterminio. So this is a strong quote. So let's take a look at how, I hope I've convinced you that it's worth including LGBTTQI learners in our lessons, and that it's worth questioning the heteronormative model. Let's take a look at how we can actually do this in practical terms. So here, let's first look at textbooks and how they project the way relationships should be, and the way men should behave, and the way that women should behave. Take a look at these images here. Can you see heteronormative myths at play here? I'll give you a minute or so just to take a look at this page before we move on to the next one. Okay, so starting with the first image, there's an image of a man and woman walking in the park. It looks very, very romantic. And most people would probably think that they're boyfriend and girlfriend. So this is obviously an image of how most relationships should be, or how we would expect most relationships to be. The man here in the second photo is in the driving seat, in a position of power, in a suit, businesslike, doing business. The woman is projected more as an artist, taking photographs, singing. Okay, so a woman in a more artistic role, in a more female role. The man in a more masculine role, a more powerful role. What about these images? How do you see the heteronormative model portrayed in these images? I'll give you a minute or so to look at these. Well, I suppose in the picture of the dancers, at least the dance teacher is a man, but all of the students are women. And this is traditionally how dance is seen. It's seen as a feminine activity. It's really not expected that men should be dancers, that boys should be dancers, or at least ballet dancers or modern dancers. The nanny in the second picture is a woman. I mean, the publisher could have chosen to put a male nanny, but the nanny is a woman. What about this photo here? How does this photo project the heteronormative model? Well, it projects a very strong masculine image. Here we have two men working out in the gym. This is the ideal for how a male body should be under the heteronormative model. This is how men should look. And the publisher is reinforcing this image of how men should be. And then what about this picture here? It's really not clear what the relationship is between this man and this woman. Who's the teacher? Who's the student? Are they both students? Why is she asking to sit down? It's a bit of a strange image, and I would argue it has a sexual undercurrent. And then this drawing from a book for primary school learners of English as a foreign language. It looks like, at the center of the picture, it looks like we've got a nuclear family. We've got a mom and a dad and their children, and it possibly might even be grandpa sleeping under the umbrella. Okay, so how can we adapt these textbooks? Because obviously we don't need to use them as is. I mean, one of the core teaching competencies is being able to adapt a textbook. And there are different ways that we can do this. We can modify the content, we can add or omit, we can reorganize the content, we can modify tasks, we can extend tasks. So there's lots of things that we can do as teachers, even though we may use these textbooks in our classes. We don't actually have to teach them exactly as is. I mean, there's lots of things that we can do in order to modify the content, in order to question the heteronormative model and include LGBTTQI learners in our lessons. Scott Thornbury called for this in 1999, using the idea of inclusion, including images of diversity in textbooks. This was 20 years ago, but I don't think textbooks have changed very much since. But he wrote, "Can I ask publishers to do us a favour? If you can't include overt gayness, how about a few covert signs that you really do care? How about a few same-sex flatmates, unmarried uncles, holiday postcards from Lesbos or Sitges, two men sharing a restaurant table or doing the dishes?" And it is amazing, actually, that the ideas that I'm presenting in this presentation, in this talk, really are not that new. And Scott Thornbury was calling for these changes 21 years ago, and the publishers really haven't taken this request into account. Another way of adapting textbooks or changing our teaching is using the idea of queer pedagogy, where we challenge learners' previous assumptions and beliefs and get them to think critically about the heteronormative images that we see in our textbook and that are present in the curricula and the syllabi that we use. How can we do this? Well, for example, in the first picture here of the couple, it looks like a heterosexual couple. We could ask our students, what do you think is the relationship between these two people? Students will probably say they're boyfriend and girlfriend, but we could ask them, well, why do you think they're boyfriend and girlfriend? I mean, couldn't they be brother and sister? Why aren't they just friends, for example? And why it seems obvious that they're boyfriend and girlfriend, but often reality is not as obvious as we would think. We could also ask them why they feel the publisher chose to include a man driving the car instead of a woman, and why did they decide to have to project a female vision of an artist, of the dancer that we can see in the bottom left-hand corner, of the singer, of the young photographer. And then in this drawing, we could once again ask them, or even not necessarily even ask them, but we could suggest that the relationship here is not necessarily that of a nuclear family, because this could be a woman with two children, with two of her children, and a friend of hers who's a man with his child. Why couldn't the relationship be that? And so there's lots of different ways that this relationship that we're seeing here could be configured. It's not necessarily a nuclear family. And by introducing these ideas to our students, we're getting them to think critically about the way relationships work and the way relationships could work. There are also lots of images. There's lots of content on the internet. This is a very interesting image. We can see a man subjectifying a woman sexually, and then something happens, something that he doesn't like. There's another man, a gay man, subjectifying him, and he's not particularly happy about that. So this image could be used with our students in order to discuss if we really should be objectifying people at all. Is it okay for one man to objectify another man, and not okay for a man to objectify a woman sexually? And how does the woman feel in this particular picture? So there's lots of things that we could do in class. There's lots of discussion that we could generate using images like this, or like this one. When did you tell your parents you were straight? Tell your parents you were straight. It's really not necessary for straight people or for heterosexual people to tell their parents that they're straight, because it's the default. I mean, parents just assume that their children are straight. Parents don't normally think that their parents might be LGBTTQI. So you could discuss with your students, why do parents expect their children to be straight? Where does that idea come from? Where did our parents learn that? And what are our parents teaching us about how people should live their sexuality and live their relationships? This is a funny postcard. Stop trying to impose your heteronormative gender roles on me. So we could ask students, why do we know that the girl is a girl and the boy is a boy in this particular picture? What are the elements of this image that tell us what the gender roles of the two children are? And is it possible that what we think is a boy is actually a girl? I mean, the child dressed as a little boy, could that little boy actually be a girl, and vice versa, and why? And finally, I'd like to discuss the idea of the teacher as a resource. I think this is important because many English language teachers are gay or lesbian, and as gay and lesbian teachers, we can there are things that we can do in class in order to include LGBTTQI learners and in order to challenge heteronormative myths. We could be honest about our sexual orientation instead of being in the closet, instead of lying about being gay. We could be honest about the fact that we are gay. We could refer to our partner's gender instead of using the pronoun they, which is a nice way of avoiding identifying our partner's gender. We could use he if we're a gay man or she if we're a lesbian. We could be open about our HIV status, not necessarily positive HIV status. We could be open about the fact that we are HIV negative as well, and open discussions about HIV and HIV status. And we could display a zero tolerance of discriminatory remarks in the classroom. We could use our role as a leader in the classroom to show our students that discriminatory remarks and LGBTTQI bullying is not acceptable in our classroom, and we could have all kinds of discussions with our students around that. Can you think of any others? I'll give you a minute or so. I know that some of you are probably gay and lesbian, or possibly transgender, transsexual. What are some of the things that we as teachers could do using ourselves as the resource in the classroom? So thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming to my talk. I hope it's been useful and that you've got something out of it. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.